Welcome to the Long Take Review, the film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Bankard, and I'm here with a couple of Philistines. First, I thought all the Nazis were hiding in Argentina, but here's P.T. McNiff. How's it going, P.T.?
He took pity on me and he gave me a job as an adjunct professor, low pay and no respect. Truer
Perfect.
words were never spoken. I'm doing
Great.
well, Jen. How are you?
I'm doing great. Shout out to all our adjunct friends. And most of the kids dislike him, pretty much hate him, teachers too. But you know that, right, Greg Cass? How's it going, Greg?
Son of a bitch, that's another detention. I'm good, Jen. Thanks for having me on.
I love how you're the one always worried about us getting an explicit rating, and then you do that. It's great. It's great. But you know, that's just what this movie's bringing out in all of us. So we are here today to review The Holdovers, a holiday dramedy about an elite boarding school in 1970s Massachusetts. It's directed by Alexander Payne, who's made many critically acclaimed films, including Sideways and The Descendants, both of which won Oscars. Honestly, there are a bunch of other films I could list, but I didn't want the list to be too long. The Holdovers is out in select theaters now and will be in theaters everywhere this weekend. The film stars Paul Giamatti, who is reuniting with Payne for the first time since Sideways, which let me tell you, like every podcast, every critic I've heard talk about this movie, that's like the main thing that they open with is like, well, they're back together now as in Sideways. And is it better? Is it as good? Anyway, Paul Giamatti plays a curmudgeonly history professor or teacher, because he's a teacher, it's a high school, who has to babysit a group of students who must remain at school over the holidays. So that's the premise. I realized the other day that like we have not been great about like just offering the basic plot premise of movies before we start talking about them. So I'm going to do that more. If you are listening to us for the first time, we will have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen the film. And then with a very clear spoiler warning, we will shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. But before we do that, PT, could you tell us what folks should do if they like what they hear in this episode and they want more?
I mean, yeah, if they cannot get enough, then please follow the Long Take Review wherever you get your podcasts. The feed is hosted on Jen's Substack, thelongtake.substack.com. But you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, all various podcatchers that you may want to use. You can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review, where we'll eventually send out updates about when new shows are released. The Anatomy of a Fall post took a minute to get out there because I saw it went up late one night and I was like, I'll do that the next day. And then it was like 3 days later, I was like, I never did that. So we will eventually tell you. Make sure you should follow us in all places. Who knows where the best information will come from.
I mean, it is a busy time in the semester for all of us. This is the pre-Thanksgiving crunch. I assume Greg is also experiencing this. So yeah, we're just lucky to be putting out episodes right now, to be honest. All right. So our last order of business before we get to our review of The Holdovers is a quick movie news check-in. So the strike has had some developments, the actor strike. I'm hopeful. But basically, there's a final offer, quote unquote, final offer on the table from the studios. And I think I didn't check today if there were any updates, but I didn't see any. SAG-AFTRA is still reviewing said final offer, right?
There was a brief update this evening to say that they are just still looking it over. It's been 2 days, so they're still looking it over. The Instagram post I saw from the union said there is still some distance between where their position and the offer, particularly on AI, they singled out. So they didn't specify what that means, if that would be just something they would accept or if they're going to go back and try to push. But it sounds like all parties are very committed at this point to getting it done. So I'm hopeful, but not completely sold that it's about to happen.
Right.
Yeah, as of this recording, which is the night of Monday, November 6th, I'm looking at the latest LA Times story is that there was an official response from SAG-AFTRA, but it's not public what that was. And I think that's in line with what Greg is saying, is it's not they're not there yet. I do remember seeing when the trades were saying, and the producers are coming back with their last final best offer, that the SAG-AFTRA pushback was like, that's what they say, of course. Like, that's some of the trades doing the spin for the producers. So, but it's good that they're back trading offers after that little downtime where there seemed to be a week or two where nothing was happening.
Yeah, and I think they're really running up against the pressure of finishing, and PT has mentioned this before, finishing before the holidays, right? Because everything kind of shuts down for the holidays. And I can't remember which podcast I was listening to, but somebody was sort of saying, look, like if this goes into the holidays and we're still here after, like, in the new year and that hasn't been resolved yet, then that's torpedoing the slate for next year, right? That then it becomes a production problem where people don't have time to actually make stuff for next year. So yeah, we're up against a deadline, kind of. So yeah, fingers crossed. Hopefully they can get it done.
And this is bad movie news reporting, but something got pushed, right? Like there was some award, like the Writers Guild Awards got pushed or something to after the Oscars. Like one of the precursors is now going to be a
WGA.
WGA.
Yeah, WGA Awards. So, which is a huge deal because that's at least for me, like a very significant bellwether in terms of not just for the screenplay categories, but for Best Picture and all the in terms of like who's going to be a front runner going into Oscar Sunday. So, very selfishly, I was like bereft on that level, but also it could potentially be a bad sign. Like if WGA is like not confident that we're going to be back in business in time for them to have the awards before the Oscars. Maybe like, do they know something we don't? Meaning like the Oscars are going to move. That's sort of what I thought.
I mean, it is also them acknowledging that their membership has been out of work for a large part of the year. So that could just be recognition of we took a break, so we're going to acknowledge that. It is just this 1 year they delayed it, right? This isn't like an all-time change.
Yeah, so. They didn't. I mean, they didn't specify one way or the other, I think. But yeah, I think the assumption is it's like for this year because exactly what you're saying. So the eligibility window is a little bit bigger, so they have more nominees, I think, or at least that's what the speculation is. That's why. But hopefully, it's not because they know the Oscars are moving anyway. Because that movie news day is going to be big.
Emergency pod.
I know. We'd have to like just hop on and record something on my phone or something like that.
Just open weeping if it happens. Yeah, just a half hour of us crying. But it is a very crowded award season because the Emmys are now in January in addition to everything else. So I think it's going to be okay. We'll have enough to kind of buzz about entertainment, but I do think, having no inside knowledge, it does feel like the Oscars are going to have to strongly consider their eligibility window, especially if some of these projects hold off because the actors can't be out. I don't know. It feels like Poor Things, one of the frontrunners, is kind of on the chopping block. It seems like the studios might not want to put that out if you can't get Emma Stone out there promoting it. People who are weirdos like us and our listeners probably are like chomping at the bit to go see this. And they've been talking about it from studios for so long. I really want to see it. But the general public, if you can't get Emma Stone out there promoting it, are they going to know what this is? I don't think the names mean as much, the director and so on. And I'm going to be honest, I think The Holdovers, our topic for tonight, suffers a little from this too. I mean, there are 3 really good performances in this, and I would love to hear them out promoting it. And they are quiet and silent. And I'll share some more anecdotes about that later, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I think I was at a kid's birthday party over the weekend and just casually brought this up, and the Holdovers, and no one had heard about it. They were like, "What is this? Like what?" And so I was like, "No."
And you were punching children who were dressed as characters from Struck Work, right? You're just scab, punch, scab. Yeah.
The Ryan Reynolds way.
Yeah, just throwing paint on them. Dude, like, yeah.
They were armed with Minecraft swords. I wasn't about to do that.
Oh, no. My thinking, to add to what everyone's saying, just real briefly, my thinking about why it would make sense if they move the Oscars would be if it got to a point where the production factory line was slowed enough that they were the industry in general was like, okay, there's going to be a gap of 3 or 4 months maybe where there's not as much stuff. If we move the Oscars into that like hole, then these award movies can be re-released, get played again. Obviously there's big ones, Oppenheimer, Barbie, etc., that like we're back. Like, there's already a re-release of Oppenheimer at some of the IMAX screens out there. But something like a Holdovers could come out again if it's got nominations and maybe find a little more footing with actors out promoting, assuming the strike's over. But that's dependent on they're not going to make that move until they know the strike's ended and what the damage is. So, we'll have to see.
Realistically, though, would that gap occur? Like, wouldn't it be around when the Oscars are anyway?
Well, my thinking is they could make it whenever they want it to be. Like the gap would probably be in, a year or so or a year and a half, but then they can delay the movies that are this spring to go to the summer movies a little bit later, or even to the next summer. And then they can just shift things back that are already like in production and post-production. Well, not production, but in post-production in order to create a hole where they want to.
I mean, my personal position at the moment is savor award season because I think summer movie season is already pretty much tanked. I don't think they've admitted them all, but the Mission Impossible move we talked about a couple episodes ago was a big blow. By all accounts, Deadpool is not going to make that early May. They'll probably move Dune to that early May spot, if we're being honest.
Christ, Greg, what are you doing? Don't speak such things into existence.
But that would be better for the movie. That would be bad for us because we'd have to wait longer. But that would be better. That would be better than March, which I think is when it currently is supposed to come out.
By the way, this is the episode. We should have been recording Dune 2 right now. It sure would have come out.
Oh, you're right. This would have been it. Yeah.
Oh.
But the Holdovers is good too.
Yeah.
So it is, I guess.
But also,
very few sandworms, I can say before we get into spoilers.
Not zero, but very few.
All right. Anything else new in either of your movie worlds before we move on?
I had a really cool experience seeing the Holdovers, and I'm going to just pepper that in all the way through our discussion of it, but I will save it for now.
Nice.
So.
Okay.
That's awesome. I had a really bad experience seeing the Holdovers. I'm going to pepper that in too.
Oh,
it wasn't really bad. It was pretty bad. It's going to be my short take. So it's a good transition.
Right. So that means we are ready for the short take. So this is our general reaction to the film. And I put in our outline here that we should probably lay out our New England cards on the table. Because I think we've mentioned it in passing in previous episodes, but like I think context about where we are coming from in terms of the setting of this movie, because that, at least for me, had a big effect on sort of how I felt about watching it, or certain parts of it. So for listeners who don't know, Greg currently lives in the Boston area. PT and I are in the general LA, Southern California area. But we all, at one point or another, lived in Massachusetts.
I mean, I will first note, I don't know, is this school necessarily in Massachusetts? I know it's north of Boston, but it might technically be in New Hampshire.
New Hampshire?
Because it feels like it's a big trip to go to Boston for them in the movie. It's not like we're going to the commuter rail and we're going into Boston. It's like a long car ride.
They don't specify, though. So I think I just assumed it was in Massachusetts.
Which is a fair assumption. And so I will just add, while not a boarding school, I did go to an all-boys prep high school. So that some of the dynamics of the teachers and the students were very real to me, even if I went 25 years later than this movie was set.
And they still talk about you at that school because you saved Latin, right? Which is just, it was phenomenal that you did that.
What did you ever do?
There it is. Yes, I will say I read the school a lot as Exeter, which is the kind of southeast corner of New Hampshire. I will say I'm a proud son of New Hampshire, transplanted to Massachusetts, so I have a lot of New England in me. I also, one of my favorite writers of all time is John Irving, And if you told me this was based on a John Irving novel, I would have totally believed you, because it reads just like one of his kind of classic novels, The World According to Garp, A Prayer for Owen Meany. A lot of these kind of, I always think John Irving is like 3 times bigger in New England than he is anywhere else in the world. But he just always writes about this kind of world. So it very much was a nostalgic hit for me in those regards. So yes, biases noted, but I will say I don't know that I loved or hated this movie because of New England so much.
All right, that's fair. For me, it just added to the nostalgia because my family lives in a suburb outside of Boston. So I grew up there. I went to high school in a town near Wellesley. And actually, like the high school that I went to, it was not at the time, but now I think is the number one high school in Massachusetts. And so what that means in terms of my relationship to the content of this movie is so many people I knew or who lived around me went to a bunch of these types of schools, like Deerfield Academy, which I think they filmed a lot of this movie at. Like people I went to elementary school with, like went off, like by the time they went to middle school or high school, went to Deerfield Academy. And my dad owned a Thai restaurant in Tewksbury, which is north of Boston, and they are down the street from a school in Andover called Phillips Academy, which is, I think their claim to fame is that George W. Bush went there. Maybe.
And that's like a sister school to Phillips Exeter, right? Like,
yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, they're the same organization.
So yeah, so like a lot of kids in blazers used to come to my dad's restaurant. So, like when they, like with a teacher, like it was very much like a holdover situation where like they were being at like chaperone to go to lunch at my dad's restaurant.
And there were townies there to give them dirty looks.
Yeah. Yes. There we did have the owner of the liquor store on the strip mall used to like love hanging out with him and chatting with my dad in the afternoon. So yeah, we had a little bit of that. But yes. I think like for me, like the sense of place in this movie is so strong, and I guess maybe this is me starting my short take. The sense of place is so strong that like, and I think I texted this to both of you right after I saw it, was that I haven't lived in Massachusetts for a very long time now. But it actually does take quite a lot for me to be like homesick, quote unquote, because it's like I don't really consider it my home anymore. It's where I'm from, but it's not my home, if that makes sense. But this movie definitely was like, oh, like it was like it made me miss it in a really big way. And so I was not expecting that at all. I really liked how this film wasn't particularly heavy-handed, but was very powerful in its portrayal of like elitism in education and sort of the like the socioeconomic disparity that kind of comes up with a school like this, and the sense of privilege and education, and how education can impact someone's socioeconomic status or not, and all that sort of stuff. So I think there was a lot that kind of got drudged up by watching this movie that I didn't anticipate. But that all that said, like I really, really enjoyed it, and I thought it was very funny. The writing is so sharp. I mean, like Paul Giamatti's character basically is like using a thesaurus every time he opens his mouth, and like, actually my favorite thing though, and this is where I'll stop, is that the way that it portrays people learning things about each other and getting to know each other felt very authentic to me, because it wasn't like characters don't have huge monologues where they're like, well, you didn't know that, like, and they tell their entire backstory. It's like you get little snippets here and there throughout the movie, which I feel like is very reflective of real life and what would happen if you're like stuck in a situation with somebody, but then you get to know them better. So overall very positive. It's not quite like my like best of the year for me right now. And we could talk about later about why, because I've been sort of mulling over why, and I still don't really know. But so it doesn't quite reach the like high heights of other things I've seen this year, but it's definitely up there.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you just said. I thought that subtlety of the interactions between the characters and the way there's again this would come up later. We can talk about, maybe there was only one moment where I was like, oh, that person's over explaining what's happening right now, like, and really just one moment in the whole movie, and it turns out there was a reason for that, like that was a narrative choice, or to help us like realize what was about to unfold. And so I really appreciated that. So my to fold into my short take, I don't want to be the like audience cop about this. But and the thing that it was a particular kind of experience where it was I think sold out, like, you know, a relatively, you know, the big theater at the Alamo Drafthouse nearby. And I had like the one person who like was making noise next to me, but it was this like older middle-aged woman who was just very responsive to everything that was happening. I think because before the end of the first act, she had 3 cocktails, and it was a Sunday afternoon, and she had 3 cocktails by the end of it. And so, like just at every potential moment when something would happen. So there was like this sort of like, I don't know how other people feel when stuff's happening, but there's like when something like this happens, it's just sort of like you can kind of just block it out for a little while. You don't like pay attention to it. Then like I start to realize, oh, this is a thing that's happening. Like this isn't like occasionally, this is every time, every scene, every moment that there could be a reaction, she has to do it verbally and has to do it like where other people can hear it. And I don't think this was malicious or it was mean. And it's the kind of thing you can't tell someone like, please stop making noises. Like you're, you know, it's not inconsiderate. It's
enjoying the movie.
Right. Yeah. It's just, but like, it also is sort of like, she's insisting upon herself in a way that's just sort of like, I don't know if you need to do that, but that's your life. And so that like, there was a moment about 25 minutes in where I was like, I'm not going to be able to have a genuine reaction to anything in this movie because everything that happens is going to be filtered through me hearing her react, and I won't be able to actually enjoy it. And within like 5 minutes of thinking that, I forgot I had thought that because I got so wrapped into what was happening. So that's my short take, is it was good enough at pulling me into the characters and the world and the dynamic of it all that lady didn't stop me from it. She almost fell down going to the bathroom. I shouldn't. She was like stumbling in the middle of the movie because she had.
I was going to say, PT, you know, did you take away nothing from this movie? You don't know what she's going through.
No, you know what? You're absolutely right. Yeah, I want. It's very minor, but I'll wait until we get to the spoiler section before I say anything in particular about the moment where I almost was like, you need to stop. Like you just have to stop.
Keep PT the movie theater curmudgeon, everyone.
Listen,
no, but I'm just kidding. You're being very reasonable.
In the theater. Yeah. Yes. But I am also a curmudgeon in the theater. I'm unreasonable at other times, but I'm being reasonable now.
Greg, what's your short take?
So in the interest of full disclosure, I should say I accidentally went to the cast and crew premiere of this film. It was, I received an invitation from the group that puts together the Independent Film Festival here in Boston, and it just said Monday night there's a free screening of The Holdovers at the Somerville Theater, which is one of our lovely independent theaters here in the Boston area. And so I went there. I got there very early because I thought it would be busy. I was probably maybe 10 back in a standby line that my friend who was with me eventually checked and said was probably about 200 deep. And he and I got the last 2 seats together in the theater so a lot of people got kicked out and disappointed and not welcomed into the screening, because what it really was is that this film shot in Massachusetts almost entirely. And it was entirely crewed by Massachusetts hardworking film crews. And so I watched this movie sitting next to the majority of the sound department. And it was wild because I sat down next to a guy and he's like, oh, hey, my name's Mike. Who are you? And we shook hands and he's like, what made you come out tonight? I'm like, oh, I'm interested in this movie for award season, and we just talked for like 10 minutes. He's like, cool, enjoy the movie. And then when his name appeared, his friends started clapping, and I was like, oh no, like I'm talking to somebody who made this. And it had been promoted that Alexander Payne was going to do a Q&A after the film, and so he had said in our opening conversations like, oh, do you like his films? And I was like, yeah, I think so. I don't really know. I've missed a couple here and there. And he's like, well, he's a really nice guy. I'm like, well, that's a weird thing to say about the director you like. Only to then realize like he has opinions on him because they worked together sincerely. So it was wild. And what ended up being very cool from a film nerd perspective is this film is artificially made to look like it's from the 70s. And we saw the world premiere of the 35 millimeter print. Nowhere at any of the festival screenings, it had all been projected digitally. And he had, Alexander Payne had just this afternoon reviewed the print in the Somerville Theater to be projected, and we were the first to see it in 35 millimeter, which is super cool. And he said added to the film. I can't really judge that, but it's because they kind of fake grain and lighting at some points, you kind of believe that, yeah, it's cool that it's actually on film. So I present all that first as a humble brag, and second, just to say, like, I'm pretty biased. It was awesome. And it's the three of us had the privilege of being at Star Wars Celebration for the Kenobi premiere, and it was very similar, where the credits rolled and people are clapping and cheering because they are literally there and their family members are there. So in this case, the credits are rolling in the first 5 minutes of the movie, and there's just wild cheering and applause as each person gets to see their name. And it's like, it put me in such a good mood for the movie. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna love this no matter what. And then you have, by all regards, a pretty great movie and a pretty well crafted movie as a part of that. So my short take would be, I think this is a very good movie. I think this would easily fit in with a lot of people's Christmas rotations as like a kind of heartwarming movie. But I will say the first thing I said on the sidewalk afterwards was like, is this really a Best Picture nominee? Because I really liked it, but I would say it's an elevated Christmas movie. I would not write it off as just a kind of hallmarky Christmas movie, but it doesn't do a lot that's unexpected, and it doesn't do too much beyond the kind of standard Christmas movie genre. So while I appreciated it and I liked the performances and I would generally recommend it as a good movie, I'm not sure I'd put it in the great movie category. And that's what I will say. There's not a lot out right now, so I'm telling people go see it because it's a great time. But I don't know if I really think this belongs in the 10, and maybe that'll be part of our discussion.
So after you said all that on the sidewalk, what did the sound guy say in response?
He said, "Go away from me, you asshole." You jerk. Now I'm really getting the explicit tag. No, I said that safely when I was not within earshot. The other mention I wanted to make is the cast was not there, but it seemed like they were hinting they might be there because he said when Alexander Payne took the stage, he said, nobody's allowed here to promote it. Nobody is appearing. But the whole balcony at the Somerville Theater was off limits, and they didn't let anybody up there, which is the part of the movie theater that's actually in the movie. So they made a big deal about, you are watching a movie in which people go to the movies and watch a movie in this same room. You're watching this movie, but they didn't let anybody from the public up there. So I'm curious if maybe some cast members snuck in to enjoy it. Some non-union extras were in my row. So there's a memorable scene, and this is not a spoiler. There's a memorable scene with a Santa Claus. I sat in the same row as the Santa Claus. Nice. And then they disclose there's a bartender who appears in the bowling alley scene. And that actor is also the priest in the chapel. He auditioned for both roles. He got the best take. And so they just put him in the movie twice, assuming nobody would notice, which I think is pretty awesome. So that's my behind the scenes takes. Both of those actors were there, but I believe they were non-union members. They're just extras. So they did not promote. They did not talk to anything. They did not do anything to break the strike rules, but they were there.
It's very New England that it could have been two brothers. One was a priest and one managed a bowling alley in Boston.
Yeah, I was going to say, you've just described another movie that could easily be taking place in Boston. The only thing I'm disappointed in, Greg, is that you didn't plug our podcast to this poor unsuspecting sound person.
Where you ask a question, but it's really just promoting. Be like, yes, Greg Cass of the Long Take Review podcast, now available on all your favorite podcasters. I did not do that, so apologies. We're not in the game yet.
My only disappointment is I didn't actually get to see the Kenobi premiere. I was at Celebration on a different day.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just correcting the record and cleaning the salt out of my wound.
Oh,
That's okay.
You were there in spirit.
I was, and I didn't need to track down a Pringle can afterwards, so to commemorate it.
I don't have it here.
Okay, so I think we've actually already started. I want to pick up on Greg's comment about this as a Christmas movie and go into the recommendation algorithm in which we establish the audience of a film. It's my algorithm noise. Still not used to that. So Greg mentioned that this is sort of like a pretty, in terms of the plot and the type of movie, it is a pretty standard Christmas movie. First of all, I want all of our thoughts on that. But I think that the thing that surprised me the most actually was, and this is related to the recommendation algorithm, because I'm going to tell more people to see this, which I wasn't expecting, right? I went to this, like we all did, because it's an award season contender, right? It's got a lot of critical acclaim. And so I assumed it would be sort of more art housey than it actually is. I think it has broader appeal, and it has kind of like that, because not just because it takes place over the holidays, because it's specifically about people who are kind of Scrooges who then become less Scroogey over time, right? I think is what Greg was referring to. And I don't think that's a spoiler. I think that's just, we're going to say Christmas movie. Like that's a pretty standard thing. So I don't know. And like people being alone in the holidays, and like, people versus people spending time together. There are like lots of the themes of the movie. In addition, it's not like a Die Hard situation where people are going to be like, is this a Christmas movie? Like, I think you can make a pretty strong case that it is. So yeah, what do both of you think about that? Do you feel like you would just like tell everybody who's looking for a holiday movie to watch this?
I mean, I don't know if I would necessarily say anyone who was looking for a holiday movie, but I think that there is a pretty big overlap of people who are like, yeah, I want a new tradition, or I want a new movie in the rotation, and they might like a nostalgic throwback with a lot of sort of acerbic characters and the way they sort of bounce off each other and interact. I could see recommending it to a lot of people. I did kind of think going in that not necessarily that it would only be something that people who care about the Oscars and awards would be interested and invested in it, but that it would be people from New England, people in academia or in education in general, and it would be like, yeah, you're gonna like a movie like this because it's gonna have memories for you. But yeah, I do think it has reach beyond that, and I do think that it is more of found family, heartwarming connections in a way that I guess between what's in the trailers, the kind of characters that are in it, and some of Alexander Payne's history of some of his movies being a little more, maybe not mean-spirited, but I guess a little bit more, a little darker over by the end of it, that this one is a little overall brighter. And I think that there's more people that would like it. So I don't know if it's going to be in like the Christmas rotation for a ton of people, but I do think it could be a second or third, like every few Christmases you throw on the Holdovers.
I said elevated, and I would say that if I think of like last year there was the Lindsay Lohan, like I don't remember what it was called, but she had amnesia and had to remember that Christmas brings joy, and like that kind of really broad Hallmark style. That was a Netflix movie, but those, I think part of people's joy of the Hallmark movie channel Christmas movie is you can just put it on, and like whenever you tune in for 5 minutes while you're baking or wrapping or walking by the television as you're cleaning, you get like a little laugh or something like that. This is not that. It's certainly doing something bigger and something better. I'll pick up on what you both said. Like, I think this is a bit of a throwback. I mean, it feels like a 70s movie deliberately. And I think it will speak to people older than us with some of their themes. And so I can see my parents both loving this movie, not as academics in any kind, but just because the characters are kind of engaging. Like, it's really fun to watch them and to just kind of see their time as young people represented, right? I would say, you know, if you were in your 20s in the 70s, I think a lot of this would be very familiar, or younger, you know, if you were actually in high school. And some of the kind of plot points fit with that and speak to a set of experiences none of us have, being just so young and attractive and, you know, virile. So I would say that would be my addition, but I certainly think outside of that, anybody who enjoys these performers, I don't hate Giamatti. I don't love Giamatti, but it is a very good Giamatti role. The performance I was most interested in was Da'vine Joy Randolph, and absolutely hit it out of the park and was probably my favorite. I fell in love with her because she was the Jack Black role in the High Fidelity reboot, which lasted only a season and got forgotten just as quickly. But I mean, that's a great part, but she just destroyed, and she was so good and so winning. Like, whenever she pops up in some small role, I'm always like, yes, it's her again. Like, I can't wait. And so to see her get her teeth into this part is worth seeing. So if you don't know her, then maybe that doesn't work for the recommendation algorithm, but she's worth showing up for and getting to know her, because I think this is the kind of part where you'll be like, I remember her from that, and she's going to get really good parts after this.
She's also the detective on Only Murders in the Building for those who watch that show. So she's been around for all the seasons of that as the sort of beleaguered police representation having to deal with the main characters. But yeah, is sort of that girl, like that woman from like a bunch of things that you've seen a lot. And this is her getting, if not center stage, many moments at center stage and just crushing it, like just doing an incredible job.
I think I had only seen her in Dolomite Is My Name, the Eddie Murphy movie. She was incredible in that. So
that's what got her this part. She Alexander Payne said he saw that and was like, that's who I want. So there's a connection there.
Amazing. That, and the other thing I should mention on the Christmas movie front, I would never say this is a family Christmas movie. It is rated R. And there's, there's mature content, both in terms of like emotionally mature, but also just, in terms of like things you don't want kids to see. So that I just want to be clear about that before anyone went and was like, hey, everybody, let's watch this movie called The Holdovers. And then it's like, oh no.
So let's call that the Love Actually warning. Like, yes, it's a Christmas movie, but not for the whole family. This is the one you put on after the kids are in bed.
100%. But I think, I'm kind of going back and forth because I do think to get more people to see this movie, I'm going to pitch it to them as a good movie to see over the holidays, because it's like Greg was saying, it's elevated, it's sophisticated for a movie of this type, but it still delivers on kind of the the snowy scenes and stuff. Like, it has all the things that would sort of like be touchstones of the holiday season. But the one thing I trip over is the tone. So I have heard tons and tons of critics talk about this as like warm and comforting and cozy and like makes them feel good and stuff like that. But to me, this movie was incredibly sad.
It's just critics low key revealing that other holidays as a child were terrible.
I don't know. So what do we make of that? Do we feel like, and this might spoil our Oscars conversation, but I'm like, I want to put this on the uplifting movie wins more Oscars now train. But then I'm like, but is it really? Because all these characters have very tragic pasts, and that's a big part of the movie.
Oh, you're treading so close to the edge of spoilers, counselor. Watch yourself. Sorry, I didn't get to be on the anatomy of a fall, so I just want to get a little of the legal jargon in. I think you're right. There it is. I think you're right, and I would say, to get away from the Christmas movie note, I would say it then the other genre, the other recommendation algorithm would be: do you like Dead Poets Society? Do you like School Ties? Do you like a lot of that kind of 70s, 80s private school dramas? I mean, I think most people would say like Dead Poets Society is a great movie, like inspiring, right? I carpe my diem all the time because of that movie, forgetting that there's a really tragic bit in the middle and a really tragic end to that movie. And I think this, and not spoiling anything, I think this can have that same kind of uplifting feeling, even if it's ultimately like dealing with darker, more realistic, dramatic things. So I'd put it in that column, and I think a lot of people would still say like, yeah, I can be uplifted by that.
Yeah, I almost wonder if some of the sort of warm, cozy feeling is the cinematic presentation of it and not necessarily the narrative, which I don't know how many people are just sort of like, they put in like fake cracks and pops, like a film print, like it, and it has the Focus Features logo. It looks like it's from 1972 instead of the one that we've seen since the early 90s. Like, that's great. But I don't know how much that carries for people, but I think that Greg's absolutely right. Dead Poet Society is what I had written down for future a future touch point in the conversation. His earlier John Irving mention, also strong. A Separate Piece by John Knowles. Is this a New England thing? That's one of the like cornerstone, like with Catcher in the Rye, a cornerstone freshman year English book in high school. But that's the kind of thing, that sort of throwback, like, not really Boys Will Be Boys, but like boys in a coming of age in a prep school environment, pushing against the environment. And in this instance, like one particular student and a teacher and an employee, like this sort of from these disparate worlds coming together. But it's not like love triumphs over all necessarily, but it is like people who have trouble making connections, and there's something nice there. But yeah, I don't think, I always sort of think of the like, and I can't think of a good phrase for it right now, but I promise I will, of like that person that only goes to see a movie with like when it gets nominated for Oscars, and then it's like, I don't see what the big deal is. This was weird, bad, sad, boring. Like it's they hear about it and then they go to see it and they're just like, Birdman, that movie was weird, and that's it. Like that's the extent of their engagement with it. I think there's going to be people who, if this gets some momentum, they'll just be like, this was a bummer, I didn't like that. But if they approach it from, instead it being like, this is a movie that's meant to feel like a movie from the 70s, and they have any kind of understanding that means it's not like has the sort of packaged narrative that maybe we're used to now, then they might be able to have a really good time with it, even if they weren't alive then, or that wasn't their youth.
Jen calls those people normies. Don't forget, that's long canon.
I feel like it's a subgroup of normies, and there's a person I'm thinking of who would do that I don't want to name or go through the history of how I know them. So I'm just gonna try to come up with a better.
You're gonna be cagey about it instead.
I'm gonna be cagey. I'll tell you off mic.
Another big movie reference for me watching this is Harold and Maude. Mostly because of the 70s thing, but also just the coming of age in the 70s, but with kind of like a sardonic humor and like and just like the needle drops, like the soundtrack to this movie, which is great. I kept being like, maybe this is a spoiler, but there was a song by a particular artist that I kept being like, oh, I wonder if they'll. Oh, there it is. Like it was and because it just really leans hard into the 70s vibes, in a good way, I think, in a way that harkens back to a good things about 70s movies. So
Jen, you saying that reminded me of something that I had forgotten because I was so wrapped up in the movie. Is at the presentation or whatever at the theater where I saw it, the end of the pre-show kind of mix of various New Year's Eve 1970 footage and other things was a little like segment by Alexander Payne saying like, here are 5 movies I recommend you watch. That was it's sort of pairing it with this movie, but also like inspiring it and working on that. And the first 2 were older. One was from the 30s, and one was like a Western, but about like a group of women going west, which like neither of them seem particularly relevant to it, or yeah, I can't quite recall the titles of those, but the other 3 were all 70s movies, and it was Paper Moon, The Last Detail, and A Special Day, which are all sort of movies from the 70s that and Last Detail is Hal Ashby as well, along with Harold and Maude. So I think that sort of that like vibe of, well, this is funny, but is it really a comedy? And also there's like an innate sort of like hollowed out sadness at the center of these characters, but then the fact that they get to experience life is a good thing. So like that's kind of, it's a weird kind of push pull that New Hollywood was letting people explore in a way that, I mean, gets explored now, but it isn't as maybe prominent in the hyped up movies now.
No, great. I think we did a thorough job. So hopefully folks go actually see this movie. I'm going to try to talk about it more with people in casual conversation, just to be, because it's the holiday season. So I feel like that's an easy pitch to be like, what movie's about Christmas? The Holdovers.
This is like your family is all adults now and need to do something Thanksgiving night. Totally go see this movie. I feel like Knives Out and Glass Onion fit that category those years, and this is that perfect. Like, everybody will have a good enough time. It'll appeal to everybody enough that you'll have a good time.
Well, we have already dangerously courted spoiler mode a couple of times, so I think we're gonna fully head into spoiler mode. If you've not seen The Holdovers, go see it, as we've been saying. If you need a movie to go see over Thanksgiving when your whole group is able to see R-rated movies, then this is a movie that we would recommend. But if you this is after I hit the music, it's on you. So I usually like to start with like the most spoilery of spoilers, because that feels like it's a good payoff for having gone into spoiler mode. But what was interesting about this is when I was trying to come up with it is that I feel like this is not a huge reveal or twist type of movie. Some critics I've heard frame that as negative, in the sense that like it never has that sort of like emotional peak. The closest thing I could come up with is that we learn that Angus's father is not in fact dead, though that when he said that was in of itself a supposedly a reveal, but that he's actually in a mental health facility. So that was the closest thing I could come up with to like the biggest spoiler in this movie. But what do both of you think?
I was gonna say, in a way, I appreciate that it isn't a movie that has a ton of spoilers, and that the big reveals are less about like, and here's a fact you didn't know going in, and more of here's how this character reacts to learning this, and how they grow over the course of seeing them kind of process information and interact with someone else in the movie a few different times. And I like that, though it does make it, I don't want to say it's too subtle. It's too subtle for normies, as Jen might say. But that it's so that it is that sort of, it's not doing sort of big, huge things which I think will stop it from getting too much traction in terms of awards, in terms of maybe some of the accolades. But yeah, I like that. And the point I referenced earlier where I was like, that was a weird, like, over explanation of what's going on, was the lead up to the twist about the father, because it's when and now I can't remember his name, Angus, when Angus has snuck out of apparently the Somerville Theater and run and gotten into a cab. And then Giamatti catches him and is just like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm going to see my dad. He's like, of course, I'll go with you to a cemetery. And it was just like, why would you say that after everything in the movie was so like very well tuned of like how people actually talk and how much information is actually revealed in a given moment. And then they pull up to, a sanatorium, I guess it would still be at the time, or some sort of hospital situation, and we meet the father, and that's very crushing in its own way because of all the ways in which the sort of narrative had been presented by Angus and around Angus of what had happened. So yeah, it was a twist, it was a development, but I think it was less like, oh my god, like M. Night Shyamalan, and more of, oh, what a like an extra kind of note of melancholy and heartbreak around what this, how and why this kid has been acting the way he has for the whole movie, and from what we've seen his recent history.
I think it's very well timed too, because it's like they had just sort of bonded more or less before that, and so the assumption then is that they've shared all they need to share with each other, and then so to reveal, it's almost more of a reveal that Angus was still keeping things from Paul, as opposed to like the surprise that his dad is not infected.
Yeah, I will say it was striking to me looking at the movie after the fact how few surprises there were, yet in the moment I didn't see any of them coming, right? So when I think about my favorite moments, what you just described, this kind of like, of course we can go to a cemetery, cut to a sanatorium, and it's like, whoa, like that's huge, and I didn't see that coming. And yet it totally makes sense, right? That he dramatically said, my father's dead. He'd proven in many other scenes he lies and is quite capable as a liar. And then the moments I think will stay with me. It's, I think of Da'vine Joy Randolph's character folding the baby clothes from her son who was killed in Vietnam and putting them in the like bassinet in the bureau of her soon to be nephew. And like, it's a silent scene that's like, could be melodramatic and manipulative, but is just like gorgeously beautiful and incredibly sad. And the same with the reveal of the meeting between Angus and his father. And then the third one I'd put in that is the fact that at the end of the movie, the big kind of final moment is that the Paul Giamatti character sacrifices his career, gives up his career to save Angus Tully and to give him a chance. And there's this great final meeting of the two of them where you can tell they should hug and like say, I'm so proud of you and I can't wait. But that would have been so gross and so unrealistic because it's a teenage boy and his, curmudgeonly professor who smells like fish. And so they don't. And they just like give each other a little guff and like all that's left unsaid. And so to me, those are the moments that are like, of course I should have seen this coming from a mile away, but it's so artfully done and it's so nicely presented that it felt earned and it felt beautiful in these ways that, I hope people go in unspoiled and just kind of let it unfold around them and kind of linger in those moments. I think that's really the beauty of this film.
Then what I would add to that list of scenes is when Mary reaches over and holds Angus's hand when he's like waiting to hear if he's going to get kicked out of school or not. And like in any other movie, that would have been a big deal where like Mary's character would have said like, you don't let them blah, blah, blah. Like she, you know what I mean? Like, but instead it was just a silent, quiet scene and they didn't make a big deal out of it. And again, as you said, I think because of how understated scenes like that are, and because of everything that has happened up until that point, it feels very earned.
That's another great example. The other one I wanted to add in addition to that one and all the ones that Greg had was we had sort of been having this plot developing of I think it's like the headmaster's assistant or headmaster secretary who was paying a lot of attention to Paul Paul Giamatti's character. And it was like, oh, there's lots of chemistry. Angus is like, there's lots of chemistry there between the two of you. And then, she invites them to a Christmas party and they're talking at the party, having a nice conversation. And then she's like, oh, hold on a second. And she has to go. And like her boyfriend has come in and she goes and kisses him. And like in a lot of movies, that would sort of be like, we have to process this, or he has to try to win her over, or that boyfriend's, some sort of terrible person. He gets put in the full Baxter role, but instead it was just sort of like, okay, like that happened. Like you get to see the realization on Paul Giamatti's face. It's not like a setback for him necessarily. It's just sort of like, right, that was a thing that happened, and that's just something that happens in life sometimes. And it's not the sort of, the movie doesn't skew off into suddenly being about that. It's just it's still about the sort of core three characters building their relationship together.
I am quickly Googling the quote, but that was the Banshees of Inisherin moment to me, where you get Barry Keoghan's part, I think I'm saying that right, where he finally like throws himself at the sister, and then he's like, do you think you could ever love me? And she's like, no. And he just says, there goes that dream then. And it's like the most heartbreaking line I've heard in a movie like ever. But it is, you're exactly right. It's like, we don't play it for big emotion. We don't do it. It's like, yep, that road's closed, right? And maybe it was never open, but there goes that dream then, and on to that lonely life. Alexander Payne told an anecdote in his Q&A about he showed this film to Walter Murch, who is a big 70s kind of producer guy. He was involved in the early stages of Lucasfilm for us Star Wars nerds. And Walter Murch, he was like all ready to impress him with like how it looks 70s and how they did the color timing and all that. And Walter Murch said the most 70s thing was the fact that you didn't end it with a hug, because nobody in the 70s hugged. And it was like done, like perfect. Like it really is like of its time that isn't, we're more expressive of our emotions now. And especially I think dudes are more physical and show that love differently now. So I just thought that was another great part of that last moment. And I totally take both of you adding those moments to the list. I think those are all great moments in this film. What makes me a little worried, and we'll come to this later, those aren't great Oscar reel moments, right? Mm-hmm. The subtlety and the beauty of putting your hand on his hand or reacting as the there goes that dream then, those are hard to make into beautiful Oscar reels, especially if, say, one of these people had to be next to Emily Blunt screaming in a conference room.
Yeah, I think the closest we come is probably the kitchen scene where Mary is just like she needs help. Like I think Angus goes to get, right? He goes to get Paul and is like, you need to come and help. And she's just crying. And she said, like, that's the only time she actually yells in the whole movie, I want to say, right? Because people are trying to console her and she's like, just get away from me. Like, so I feel like that's the clip they probably would choose, though that's not the clip I would choose. You know what I mean?
What clip would you choose, Jen?
I would.
I have one in mind.
Okay. Well,
I want to hear yours.
Oh, jeez. I'm like, if you have it, just say it.
Okay. Well, I know. I thought you had it too. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to like put you on the spot.
No, I just meant I would choose some of the other ones. I didn't have as good
in mind. Mine is the scene right before that when she's listening. She sets up the Artie Shaw record and puts it on, and someone is like, yo, you're killing me with this music. And then she's like, shut up. Or like says something like, she says something funny.
She's
and
like,
then
don't you touch that record.
Right. There's one like kind of shot that like, I don't think maybe it's like very slowly zooming in, but it's like a tight shot on her face. And there's just like 20 emotions that run through. And then the end of the sort of sequence on her face is she says to the janitor, who is he's just doing his best. He's just taking his shot. He's trying to pick her up all movie. I appreciate his dedication. But he's there and she just looks at you and says like, I need another drink. And it was like, that's, I don't know if that's showy enough to Greg's point. I don't know if that's flashy enough, but like that was the moment where I was like, this is absolutely incredible. We'll see what it means for an Oscars watch. I don't want to give away too much, but like, I thought that was the moment.
Yeah, it's so nuanced too. And her whole character is so nuanced, right? Because she's like, it's a really good depiction of grief because it's not consistent the entire time, right? She's not just sad the whole time, right? It kind of comes and goes. It catches her by surprise in certain places. And then I feel like her performance is just so grounded, because like sometimes she's really funny, sometimes she's really wise, like, but other times she just like does not have it together uh in a way that I thought was really refreshing, because I feel like her character could have easily been only the sort of like, let me talk some sense into everybody character, right? I feel like that's in a lesser script, that's what she would be. But you know, and like when she is that, I think it's really effective, because like they're 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 rudely having a conversation about her in front of her when they're leaving the party, and she's like, don't you feel sorry for me, right? And so it's like little moments like that where like her personality comes out, and it isn't all like, well, let me tell you how it is, like, let me give you good advice and then you'll leave and then the movie's really about you, I'm just here. Like, she's very much a part of the movie to me,
Yeah.
in a way that's very important.
One of my favorite old jokes in Community is Jeff Winger turns to a black cafeteria worker, and she's like, "Why are you looking at me?" And he's like, "Oh, sorry. Pop culture has taught me that old black women just dispense wisdom, and that's all they do." And she's like, "I'm not talking to you." Like, and it feels like you're right. That's the trope that they avoided as a stereotype. So as we build out all the super talented people who made this, we have to shout out David Hemmingson. This is his first movie he ever wrote as screenwriter. And the story behind this is he wrote a pilot set in a private school. And Alexander Payne had been mulling over this idea for the Holdovers, and was basically like, "Oh, I liked your pilot. I don't want to make that, but I think from that I can tell you might get this idea, and you could help me get this idea off the ground." And Hemmingson is the one who came up with Mary, that added her. And this movie does not work without her. I don't understand how you have stakes. The fact that Mary is there, and it's what anchors those themes you mentioned, Jen, about class and education, and just like this beautiful defense of education in so many ways. And the fact that like they play Vietnam so subtly. So my friend who I walked out of the theater with, he made fun of me because I got home, and it's Ben, and I'm sure Ben's listening. Yes, Ben, you made fun of me. And Ben pointed out, like, we were walking, I'm like, I don't know, it's not that great. And then I got home and I did 4.5 stars on Letterboxd, and he's like, what is this? Like, you're like. And so my defense of my shift was I sat alone in the car on the drive home after dropping him off. And I thought that, like, the subtlety in which they play Vietnam, that Vietnam is in the background here. And you realize that's what Paul Giamatti did. He saved him from dying in Vietnam. And they play that subtly through Mary's character. And that gives stakes to that final act that, you know, it's a cliche to be like, oh, the troubled kid's going to end up in military school. But then you're like, oh, no, but military school means something very different in 1970 than it does to us, you know, elder millennial types who it's like that's a vague threat, not an actual you're going to die. And so I just think it was a stroke of genius. And it apparently came from the idea of like, well, if these guys are stuck at the school, who's cooking for them? And just let's make that a real person. And I just think it's a master stroke and really well acted. So shout out for those additions.
I like, that's a good distinction, that it did take me a while in the movie to be like, this isn't like Ted Theodore Logan's father being like, oh, you're going to go to military school. Like, that's going to be a bad couple of years. But it's like, no, you're going to be in in a helicopter in Vietnam in a few months if you don't get your act straight. So I agree with everything that both of you are saying about sort of the structure of it. Something I'm curious about, and I'm not the person to necessarily ask this question, but I will. Is there something to? I guess I'll build up the question a little bit more. By one of the things I thought, oh, this is interesting and subtle, was the kind of, she's the, she's staff. She cooks there. She's like, I got this job, so my son could get the education here. And there's a lot of just sort of like, yeah, like, and he was a real student here and we really liked him, which really feels a lot about sort of like, we didn't think he was a real student. We thought he was like a person we had to let in. But like, luckily he was okay, which had both the class component, but also the race component, because I don't think there's another Black student in the school. There's a few Asian students. We have one that's with, as part of the holdovers for, a little bit. But they're very subtle about the racial component. And I remember thinking later in the movie, we're pretty far into the trip into Boston when they're in the restaurant and they want, like, she shows up and it's like, stand up, you oaf, like a woman's here and they want Cherry's Jubilee. And the waitress is like, can't do that because you're underage. And I got to admit, maybe this is me being too tuned in or overly sensitive. I was like, so we're in a restaurant in Boston in the 1970s and a Black woman's come in when there's no other Black people there. Like, how is this waitress going to react to that? Like, what is her thing going to be? And it isn't mentioned. Like, it doesn't, she doesn't say anything. It doesn't come up. And I'm wondering if there will be people who will think that's a dodge. That's, David Hamilton did a great job. Alexander Payne, amazing job. Both white, a lot of white people. It's like, I wonder if like there was a Black writer had been a part of this, if they would be like, I don't know if this experience, even if it's mostly she goes to Roxbury and visits her sister, if when she meets up with the rest of them in Boston, that she is like, I feel super comfortable and everything's going great here in early 70s Boston. That's, I don't know. And I don't know if that's something that like might be a knock on it, because I think that my initial read was, oh, this is a subtle, like, who is welcome and who isn't, who's accepted. It's sort of just putting it out there in that same way as the holding hands, those little like flourishes of character. But I wonder if there are people who will think it's dodging sort of a more uncomfortable reality. And if that is a testament to, we need things to be more obvious and more, shouted out all the time, which is therefore a bad thing, or if it's that, it's a kind of a blind spot for the filmmakers. I don't know. I honestly don't know.
I feel like for that specific scene, you can sort of explain it away by her character. I don't know if I agree with this, but if I were to try to explain it, I would say that because of she's worked at Barton for so long and she's used to telling off like snooty white people, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. that might give her a skewed, like might give her, I don't want to say unfounded confidence, but you know what I mean? Like that she doesn't, she's less likely to be sensitive to, oh, like I'm in a fancy restaurant in Boston and like people might not want me here because of my skin color. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, but I don't know. I don't know how well that holds up, but I feel like for me, at least, the really good scene that does establish the racism is when Kuntz is like, the look that he gives her when Paul invites her to sit at the table, to me said everything. Yes. You know what I mean? Like, cause it's like, they never, no one ever talks about it in that context. No one ever says like, yeah, that kid's pretty racist, right? Like, if anything, you could sort of explain it away as like he's more skeptical of her from a class perspective, like, oh, the help doesn't sit with us, you know. But I feel like, to me, the look that he gives and just like how like, wait, like how like his world is crashing down because like a Black woman is going to sit at their table, to me, like without them discussing it explicitly, said a lot in terms of establishing the context of like the dynamic between Mary and these kids, right? That a lot of them probably would be like, and he says some really terrible thing like, well, like she's getting paid to do a job.
Yeah, even like, so, she may be really sad, but she's still getting paid to do a job, so she should do it well.
Yeah,
something like that. And it's noteworthy to what you say is that when that kid leaves, I mean, the majority of the kids leave, she does sit down with them. And so, is that because that one kid didn't make her feel comfortable, or she just does feel comfortable with Angus and Paul? I don't know, but yeah, that was like, cause she very quickly is just sort of like, I'm good. Like, no thanks to the invitation. Like well, okay. I'm not going to do that. I'll be in the back. And then later is like, yeah, I can hear everything he says. That kid's the worst. So yeah, you're right. I think there is a lot. It's there. It's very subtle. I am curious if there'll be people who will be like, this is sidestepping the issue, but it is in line with how they handle everything else in the movie.
When Jen started talking, I really wanted to interrupt and say, like, actually, as the white man, I'll take this one, Jen. But I lost my nerve, so I will just say the joke later instead of enacting the joke.
Even with the bow tie, you didn't have the nerve?
Oh, yeah, I forgot. Listeners will have no idea. Greg dressed for this occasion. He's wearing,
as I always do.
I can't.
So
That's true.
yeah, I'm hoping you all start stepping up your visual bits.
I don't own a bow tie. Like, what was I supposed to?
Oof. Now I had all right.
I don't know.
Your Christmas present is picked out. So, Jen stole my thunder because I think this movie. I think it's a very good question about whether it's a dodge or not. And I think again, like PT said, I'm the wrong person to judge that. But I will say I think the movie makes itself about class, and the reason to do that, despite racism being a huge part of 70s in, shockingly, Boston, we pretend we're not racist, but then every sports game ends up with a racial epithet thrown at an opposing team player somehow. But no, we're not a racist city at all. Yeah, I think it could be read as a little bit of a dodge, but the way you use class unites them more easily. And, God, is that the oldest lesson in America in the book, which is they divide us over race so that we ignore class, right? That we would pit these characters against each other for that, as we do. The fact that the janitor is also a black man, and he gets a moment where Angus has puked on the floor, I guess because he landed hard and then puked. It's a little unclear.
I think it was the pain from the dislocated shoulder.
From the dislocated. Okay. So he puked on the floor and they just left the puke. And the janitor gets a great moment where like somebody puked in there and they like try to like be like, oh, that's strange. Like, I can't imagine. And he just drops the bucket at them, which felt like a good comeuppance moment. Like, yeah, we're not playing those games. We're on more equal footing now. And, this is no aspersion on places I've worked, but I think when I've worked at private campuses, there's often a divide between members of the staff who work as custodians or cooks or what have you, and the kind of white collar staff in the offices of Res Life and financial aid, never mind the faculty. And there's that divide in these spaces that I think is often reinforces racial divisions, right? The people who speak Spanish on the campus I worked at are the ones who are in those service roles and the Spanish professors, but you know what I'm saying. And so we see the kind of class and race dynamics still in these spaces that are still meant to be inclusive. And to that end, I will say I've worked at two very small universities, and the last one I worked at, the maintenance guy got his daughter in and got her a full ride at our private, really expensive institution by working maintenance on campus. And there was this like celebration of the fact he could do that, while also this little bit of condescending, like, well, gee whiz, isn't that good that he can get her in? Almost undercutting the fact that she deserved an education and was super smart and was like all these things. But it's like, hey, we let her into our space. Let's congratulate ourselves for our charity for doing so, right? And we didn't feel that way when a professor's kid came to campus, but the maintenance guy's daughter got that attitude. And so I think so I'm agreeing with PT that it's a cheat on dodging racism, but it's a good way to call academia out on the ways we think the fact that education helps everybody excuses us from our own sins of classism and racism, but classism, very commonly.
And to go back to your point about how Vietnam War is so subtly looming in the background, I feel like that aspect of it makes it intersectional, because I feel like they do such a good job of talking about, is it Curtis is her son's name? Do they
I think
remember?
that's right.
Yes.
They talk about Curtis like he was such a promising student. Like he liked, even though it wasn't popular, he liked listening to Artie Shaw. And like there are little details that you kind of pick up about him that make it seem like he's living the American dream in some ways, right? Because he wouldn't normally have access to this kind of education, but look how much he's thriving in it. And then that gets totally undercut by, oh wait, but he's poor and black and therefore he's ends up in Vietnam, right? And like and I feel like they do such a good job of like showing that even if he is granted access to education in sort of like what we would consider an equitable way, like, you know what I mean, like in a win for equity, right? Educational equity, but that doesn't matter, right? Because society outside of the educational institution is still doing its thing, right? And that he still ends up, because Mary can't pay for him to go to college, right? Then he ends up enlisting in the army, right? And so yeah, so to me, and again, like there's no conversation that says that, but I think to me it was so glaring, like it was very obvious that they were showing it, right? And like the editing is really good in this sense too, because the way they cut back to his photograph periodically, I feel like says a lot, even though the characters aren't explicitly saying like, well, you know, like because like young black men are more likely to go to Vietnam. You know what I mean? Like no one's you know, like editorializing about it, but they're just showing it. So I wanted to ask this big question about history, and since we're sort of talking about Vietnam, the Vietnam War, I think that's maybe as good a time as any to segue into that. So to me, Paul Hunnam being a history teacher, granted it's ancient civilization, but the fact that he's a history teacher specifically, and that he has such reverence for ancient history, to me didn't seem like an accident, and seemed like it was trying to be part of the theme of the film. And so he has this one line to Angus. I think it's when they're in is it the MFA?
I think so, yeah.
Right?
The
like
fact
I was
that
like,
you didn't know that upsets me. But yes, it was the MFA.
No, that's
she
what
said. She's been gone for a long time, Greg. She says it's
if
no longer her
you
home.
Looked out that window behind them, you would see our office building at Northeastern. But go on. I will leave my New England snobbishness out of this.
I was asking that with a questioning inflection, not because I didn't recognize it as the MFA, but because I wasn't totally sure if it actually was the MFA. That was I was looking for confirmation. Thanks. Everybody.
I will note this has been a brutal movie to not have the filming locations populated on IMDb, because I desperately wanted to know where everything was, where they caught some of these bars, some of these sites around 70s Boston. Like what did they do?
Anyway, so in the like ancient civilization section of the MFA, Paul says, history is not merely a study of the past, it's an explanation of the present. And so I wanted to kind of, because I like that idea as that line is sort of like in some ways the thesis of the movie. And obviously there's like the dynamic between the characters kind of confronting their pasts, right? So they can move on in the present. So on a character level, I think that works, but also the fact that this movie is like such a glaringly loud throwback to the 70s, right? Because we've talked a little bit about like it's not just sort of that it's set in the 70s and trying to reproduce what everything would have looked like in the 70s, but it's actually shot in the style of a movie from the 70s. So like, how does that fit in? Like, why is Alexander Payne going to such lengths to recreate a 70s feel and aesthetic?
I'm going to start with the what I think is the more obvious point, and dodge your actual question and make Greg answer it, and say that, you know, the most sort of immediate impact within the movie of that line and that concept is that each of these three characters has a history that we get like a sketch of in the beginning of the movie, and because they get to know each other, we peel back more and more of the layers to see sort of what happened, how things developed, et cetera, and that like that's informing who they are now. So I mean, maybe that's obvious to say. It does lead me to say the one thing we didn't talk about in terms of the like revelations that happened was that Paul almost killed someone when he was at Harvard, because he had been the sort of he was the sort of outcast kid that like, you know, didn't have friends. It seems like he may have been like a scholarship kid, like didn't come from means, or certainly he didn't have a relationship with his dad where his dad would lift him up out of something. And his roommate did have that. Roommate cheated, turned an accusation on him. Someone was hit by a car. It's all, these are the things that happen. So, that like these this is how they ended up in this position. This is how they ended up where they are. And that's the sort of localized version of that big concept of we must look at Mesopotamia, Greece, the Peloponnesian War, etc., in order to understand dynamics and culture of today. In terms of what that means of this being such a 70s aesthetic in the filmmaking, well, I'll let Greg handle that.
I'm so glad I could tackle this. In some ways, it reminds me of the cinematic masterpiece, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, that we have a modern crowd of students dismissing their old curmudgeonly professor and writing him off as a stay. So putting Indiana Jones aside partially, but never fully. Wait, what?
you need another drop. That's the bum, ba-da-bum.
Yeah,
like just a little like
Sando. That was me filing an objection for excessive reference to.
Oh, that. I mean, I thought Greg was going to bring it up when he was talking about subtle uses of Vietnam, but that's okay.
And portraits of just lost, fallen sons that really impact you. It's a really good question, and I do think you could run the risk of overextending the thesis comment, as you said, about understanding the present and the past. But the fact that it's made in the 70s and all the comments, I've listened to a couple interviews, both in person and on podcasts with Alexander Payne, and it's all kind of hand-wavy about this point, right? I think we shouldn't ignore the fact that it lets you get rid of cell phones, which is becoming a more common tactic in putting it in kind of the near past, is that cell phones short circuit all of your narrative choices. And so, like, if this were set in the present day, he'd sit in his room on social media texting all his friends and wouldn't ever talk to the teacher. So that's both an excuse, but also, like, could that possibly be part of the message, that it has to be to go back to this time when real connection was possible? I think I could make a case for that this kind of connections you're getting here don't happen today. And that's a shame in some ways. But I don't know that I'm ready to sign fully onto that view, because I also just think this does, in being set when it is, kind of offer a little bit of a corrective on the okay boomer narrative. And Alexander Payne is not old enough to need to defend his generation, and the timing is not right for this to be boomers. I guess you'd be like 25, right, in 1970 if you were a boomer. An immediate mom and dad met after VJ Day and had a good time. So I do think there's something here, though, about the fact that this was a time when the stakes were a little more real, and that we have to understand some of what that generation lived through in order to understand kind of how terrible they are today. Or when we say terrible things and dismiss a lot of that worldview, we forget this was there, right? The fact that we are all on the older edge of the millennials, and I won't speak for you two, I guess. I don't have a strong connection to Vietnam personally. My dad served. He was a veteran. He will share some stories about that, but I don't personally feel stakes around the Vietnam War or some of these more modern wars. And yet this made me really feel that in a different way. And that's an advantage that then helps you recognize the current moment in our country by examining the past a little bit more. And you could make a kind of nationalist argument there, not nationalist, but, national story argument there as a part of that. But, Jen, I know you asked the question because you already had the perfect answer in mind. So go ahead and fill us in on what your answer was.
Shocking. I didn't actually have an answer beforehand, but what you were saying is making me think of the idea of this historical moment in terms of education and education as an institution, and like boarding schools or prep schools like this one. And the thing I keep coming back to is it's pretty early on in the movie. I think it's the memorial service for Curtis, where they kind of, there's there's a montage of shots of like memorials for other students who have died. Do you remember this? In various wars, right? Like it's their other like war, like they've been their war memorials in the school. And then there's also like throughout, and I feel like it's like actually a lot more than I probably remember in the movie. Throughout, they keep cutting to these portraits, and obviously like they functionally have to cut to the headmaster that Paul keeps referring to, that gave him a chance, right? And that hired him even though he was washed up by this scandal at Harvard and stuff like that, right? And he was allowed to come back and get a job as a teacher. But I feel like there's so many other just like random shots of like old white men in portraits that to me it feels like that this movie has located a time and a place where it was like on the precipice of something. You know what I mean? Where it was like the beginning of the end for like a time when a school like this would have had only white boys and then maybe like one Asian kid and one black kid. You know what I mean? Like, so that's the thing I kind of think of, because I think that the fact that it's at a boarding school and an elite school, and they definitely imply, and this is what made me think of Phillips Academy and how its claim to fame is that it like senators and presidents and like it produces all of these like really important historical figures, right? Or important men, that must have something to do with what the film is trying to talk about. You know what I mean? Like that you wouldn't set it there without kind of engaging with this idea of entitlement and legacy and sort of the damage that does to our society as a whole. This is a thing that Paul's fighting against, right? He's failing these kids because he's like, no, I'm insisting on a meritocracy, despite that this is politically a bad idea for me and eventually will get me fired, right? That he has the sense of like kids shouldn't be granted this privilege of education just because their parents are important and rich, right? So I don't know. It's something, I feel like it's something about that.
Oh, I think that was a much better answer than mine or PT's shrugging off of the answers. Yeah. But I will say everything you just said there really makes me want to put this in conversation with Election, which is another Alexander Payne movie, and Chris Klein character from that. I think that's the actor's name, who went on to do American Pie, or maybe did that before Election. I don't remember the order of those teen comedies.
He was in Election first. I think American Pie might have come out first, but similar to Dominic Sessa, who plays Angus in this movie, Chris Klein was just a student at the school where they were filming.
Crazy.
And Alexander Payne in both instances was like, why don't you audition? Like you have the right look. And then they auditioned, and I mean, Chris Klein had a perfectly cromulent career, doing things, and hopefully Dominic Sessa will as well, because he's excellent in the movie.
Well, and he caught Reese Witherspoon on the way up, and Shailene Woodley. So Alexander Payne's doing pretty well, kind of finding these actors on their way up, or discovering him. I think is how people are characterizing Dominic Sessa. The shorthand on Election is that Tom Perrotta, the novelist, wrote it as a kind of allegorical telling of the 1992 election, that the characters are essentially George W. Bush, the nerd, Bill Clinton, the like cool jock, everybody loves him guy, and then the sister is Ross Perot, the like just chaos agent in the mix. And since then, Election has been like, everybody said Election was secretly the 2016 election, right? Because it just felt so easy to paint them on there. But the Chris Klein character is that kind of entitled. His family is super rich, and he's just like, gee whiz, aw shucks. And so when you say all you did about this movie, it does feel almost like Alexander Payne offering a corrective on his earlier, because I think Election is a movie where there's no really good characters, but maybe the best one there is Chris Klein, is the kind of like inoffensively naive more than he is evil in any regard, as opposed to some of the things other people do. Although Unspooled, the podcast, just convinced me that Tracy Flick is not at all evil and we're all just sexist. And it's a pretty compelling case to say that. Because she's on a list of a lot of the greatest movie villain of all time lists, and it's ridiculous. So that's a very good episode of Unspooled.
That sounds like a big Amy Nicholson take. I could see her being like, no, I am reclaiming Tracy Flick.
Yeah, well, sorry, I'll say my election take. So I do think that makes a lot of sense to me, and it actually reminds me a lot of our Martin Scorsese discussion 2 weeks ago, that he glamorized a certain type of gangster. Let me show you the reality that these guys are just stupid and greedy and morally bankrupt. Hey, I accidentally glamorized the rich kids and that they're all gee whiz not doing any harm. What if they're the evil all along, right? The call was coming from inside the prep school. And I think that is a very good take you offered, Jen, and it just reinforces kind of what this project may be.
And I feel like I really want to do this, and it's a total tangent. Jen, cut it if you feel we have to. I did look up, while you mentioned it, Phillips Academy, Andover. Actually, I'm sorry, this is just Phillips Academy, period. I believe this covers both. No, it is. This is just the Andover one. The notable alumni. Are you ready for the notable alumni of Phillips Academy? President George H.W. Bush and President George W. Bush did both go there. Oliver Wendell Holmes, pretty famous there. Hosea Quincy III of the Quincy, John Quincy Adams and John Adams, and of the Quincy Market in Boston. That's Hosea Quincy III.
Played by Paul Giamatti.
Yes, exactly. Edgar Rice Burroughs of Tarzan and John Carter, author fame. Humphrey Bogart, Jack Lemmon, Bill Belichick, and speaking of rich kids only doing good in the world, Lachlan Murdoch, aka the real life Kendall Roy.
Wow, that's quite a motley crew.
It really is. It really is.
Someone write the movie where they all come back to haunt us.
Yes. They're the team up movie, the Avengers movie of all these people. It's tough.
Or it'd probably be more like the Expendables.
I mean, God willing.
Wow, that's crazy. And I guess for me to maybe for just a brief moment loop back to what I said at the very, very beginning about sort of like my since you're bringing up Phillips Academy again, education when I was a kid was the most important thing to my dad, and making sure that my brother and I had access to good education and that we didn't have to work to pay for our education, and that we only studied so that because his whole mantra all throughout my childhood was like, as long as you get into a good name brand school, you will have a better life. And so I feel like this movie really resonated with me on that level, right? Because they actually also imply, they don't say it explicitly, but I feel like Angus is only going to the school because his stepdad is someone who's super rich, right? They kind of imply that like maybe if this thing hadn't happened with his dad, he wouldn't be going to boarding school.
Yeah, and also that he's been kicked out of a few schools, so they have the money to sort of pay them in. Yeah, in when it's the kids got red flags. So yeah, and they were going to go to St. Kitts. Like he was going to be picked up and go to St. Kitts for winter break, which is not a cheap excursion. So.
Yeah.
Not trying to bogart the hosting duties. Jen, I think you should take us into Rhetorical Situation, because your third point on the outline really resonates with the discussion we're having.
That's a good point. Okay. So we will now move into the Rhetorical Situation, a segment in which we look at a film through the lens of our academic experience. So in the teaching of writing, the rhetorical situation refers to any contextual factors that influence composing and interpretation. I guess the thing we were talking about is education.
So Jen made some excellent points in our narrative. One is the value of education, which I think, we're not going to pretend the three of us can in any way be objective and neutral on. We've devoted our lives to education and we want to help with it. And I think, but I do think that the value of education has changed so much over this time period, right? The gap between when this movie happened, when this movie is set and the present day. And I think there's a lot of anxiety in our current moment about, is a college education worth it? Is it worthwhile? And, the way you just described your dad's attitudes, I think is a very common attitude for the kind of post-boomer generation. I'm being sensitive to our elder PT, who probably considers him a late Gen Xer, even though he's just on the other side of 1980 from us, elder millennials. But there was a pressure for education, and education was just a given, and the way, like you said, to get ahead and all that, and now in the present day, we're having this anxiety about it, that what is the value of education in a world where jobs are more prevalent, when AI is going to do all our jobs anyway, or whatever, right? The current anxiety. And I do think the burden of an education and its expenses are very real to us and to our students, to our generation and to our students. But it's also not the same as, oh, if you're not in college, you're going to go get shot in the jungle. And so it's really at play in this movie, and a very interesting kind of corollary on entitlement. And so let's not lose sight of the rhetorical situation. Let's fold both of those as character values that get folded into the value of ethos, right? So we've spoken about ethos before. That ethos is basing an argument in the character of the speaker, right? To make it clear that their background, their qualities entitle them to a position, and you should believe or not believe a position based on the character of the speaker to some degree. And so that to me becomes really interesting when we think about, how do we place education within ethos? How do we place honor within ethos? And how do we then think about the ways in which are we accidentally just reinforcing entitlement by the kinds of ethos we value?
So the thing I want to kind of jump on within that is how education has historically evolved, right? I guess Paul has gotten to me, right? Like, I keep going back to this sense of history. I really just want to get an A, everybody. But, if we think, and I'm thinking really, really broadly here, right? If we think about the way higher education in particular has evolved, I feel like, and, or I should just say me as like an English PhD, very biased in terms of like how I'm orienting myself in terms of history, right? So like, in England, education was primarily about character, right? And I think a lot of that is still, the legacy of that is still in this film, because Paul keeps referring to Barton men, right? And sort of like how he wants to raise upstanding men and stuff like that. But if you think about the way education has evolved, as higher education kind of democratized more, it moved away from where we want to create young men of good character, right? And became more about the actual academic learning, right? Like we don't offer classes about moral character. As far as I know, right? I guess I shouldn't say that with certainty, but
those are now called mandatory trainings.
Right.
They're not. It's different.
Right. They're HR modules that we now have to do.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is that this was still, again, nostalgic. Maybe it's nostalgic for harkening back to a time when there's this idealized version of education as shaping our moral character. But then if you actually think about the film, we've already mentioned this, like Angus is constantly lying. And there's this back and forth between him and Paul about like, lying is, you just lied, lying is bad. But then there are situations in which lying is helpful and good, right? But it's also this weird and kind of dangerous sense of like, we're both in the same club and we're protecting each other. You know what I mean? Like they have this sort of quid pro quo where like one lies for the other in a way that like strengthens their bond. And so like, it's a good thing for their character development. But then if you think about it in the context of like Barton men, I feel like it's a little slippery and kind of weird.
Well, I mean, I think that what that is rooted in is that the concept of Barton men has always been a lie. Like it's, or at least it's like, it's always just been about you're in a club and the club is here to protect you. And that's why he's in trouble. Paul's in trouble at this point in the movie because the student he had that he failed, who wasn't able to go to, I think, Cornell, and the dad is a senator or has some position and is really mad and is one of the big donors. Yeah. And it's just like it's just sort of like you were supposed to, he's here in the club, we're helping him get to college to keep on to do the thing that he's supposed to do. Like you didn't look out, like you weren't looking out for your fellow Barton man. And Paul's the one who's clinging to this historical concept of just like, no, we're here for, integrity and honor and meritocracy. And, he has to sort of hold on to that because he doesn't really have anything else, because all the other, again, he had that sort of shot of, I can get away from my abusive dad. There's never any real talk about whether that was like, he was a high class moneyed person or what, but he gets to go to Barton. He gets into Harvard. The incidents and problems happen there partially because he's not in the club that his roommate was in. He has to sort of fall back to, all I have is this small world. I never leave campus, or I very rarely do. And so like this has to be important for him to make his life worthwhile. And so, he has that, I'm looking back, I'm looking at the history of everything, but his actual like present is just now. And so he has to think, I need to know all those things in the past to understand why all this is important now. And really what it comes down to is almost like the division between education, quote unquote, and learning. And he learns about the people around him, learns to build his own connections in his own club. And that's by somewhat rejecting his concept of what education is, which is the meritocracy, which is the Barton man, and which is the sort of, honesty, academic integrity, and honesty above all. By the end, I mean, that's his big sacrifice, is telling a big lie about what happened when going to see Angus's dad.
Well, and that's exactly the point I was going to hit on, is there is a weird snake eating its own tail, which Loki has taught me to call an Ouroboros, which is that situation going on, that education, and to pick up on the start of what PT said, is it's always been a lie. It is not a big jump from Barton men don't lie to, hey, let's all defend Brett Kavanaugh in front of Congress because a lady made him cry, right? Like, I'm sorry, it's just not a big jump that the privileged protect the privilege. And that's what I think a lot of us who are on the outside of these private boarding schools feel about them, right? That it's the way for the rich to make sure they're all in the club and protected. And so if the film is all about how that's a lie, then PT said it exactly right at the end of his comment. And that is that the most honorable act in the film is a lie. It is sacrificing yourself for your fellow man. And where do you build that connection but in education? And there's the snake eating itself, right? It's that the credential on your paper is what we pretend has value, but it doesn't actually have the value. The value is the connection and the community and the awareness of real life. And I think the Barton men don't actually learn about that side of the world. They don't form those connections with people who are different than them because they go to a school where they're all the same, right? But then as, back to Jen's comment, as higher education democratized, broadly speaking, over the 20th century, that's where it became a place where a Mary can meet an Angus, can meet a Paul, and maybe those are all students in our modern classrooms. And there's the real power. That's why I still love my job, is because that's the power of education. Not whatever I say up in the corner while they're all texting on their phone, but the fact they can hear each other share ideas and recognize perspectives that aren't their own and form their own subjectivity. That's the beauty of what we do. And I think it's what this film is saying is, let's reject the way we have thought about education while still cherishing what that education can grant us. So Ouroboros, there you go.
Wow. Well done. The thing you made me think of is, because originally the question I had in the rhetorical situation is like, what about the film's depiction of education sort of resonates with our own experience in higher education? And I feel like, PT and I teach at USC. The really unforgiving nickname or alternative acronym is the University of Spoiled Children. I don't know if Greg knew that,
I hadn't heard that, but now I'll use it whenever I'm talking to you two.
Amazing. And I feel like since I've been working there, there's been a push and pull and kind of like a tension in terms of controlling the narrative of USC in terms of like, is it the University of Spoiled Children or is it more than that, right? And because I feel like the stereotype still exists, and trust me, like I'm not gonna get into specifics, but I have seen support for the stereotype for sure. But at the same time, for every student that sort of fits that stereotype, there's another student who has like an incredible story about like where they came from and what it took for them to get to USC, and that it's been their dream their entire life, and that like their family like lived in a neighborhood in Los Angeles near USC, and they grew up going to games, but they never dreamed that they would possibly be able to go to a school like USC. You know what I mean? Like, and you know, we have so many first generation students and students of color, students of high financial need, like that really tell a different story, tell the story of sort of the Curtises and the Anguses at the school. And so for me, that was really that might be informing my interpretation of the film to a certain extent.
I agree. I think that makes sense. And I will say we jokingly referenced it earlier, but as you were talking about it, and as we keep discussing these sort of prep schools in my mind, I really want to double feature this with Rushmore, because that is another movie with a different take, but a similar sort of like, what is it like to be an outsider at a place like this?
And you get the same Cat Stevens needle drop, which I think is the one Jen was referencing with Harold and Maude.
I was like, is that a spoiler? Cat Stevens a spoiler? I don't know.
It was in the trailers. I feel like
really?
the first like 3 or 4, and this may be having the Alamo as my local go-to movie theater. I have seen the trailer for this movie a dozen times. So like there were a few moments where I was just sort of like, I wish I hadn't seen that trailer so many times, because like the first like 4 or 5 songs in the movie are all in the trailer. And I was like, yep, yeah, it's going to be Baby Blue. Like, that's right. Yep. I knew that. I knew that was what was coming next. And there were some moments like that when they're holding the hand that I was like, yeah, that was in the trailer. Like, that's the scene from the trailer, which it still had the emotional resonance because of everything else. But anyway, yeah, Cat Stevens all over the trailer. Everyone knows.
I love that Cat Stevens song too. I was like, yes, like it is Max Fisher. I made that connection too. But my version of that, PT, is the trailer has a song in it that I don't know what the song is, and I only know the 2 lines that are in the trailer, and I get it stuck in my head endlessly. It's like, no matter what you do.
That's Baby Blue. That's the song. Yeah. It's also
always be with you, and then I got nothing else, and I like can't get it out of my head. It's just those 2 lines.
You can go. You can look it up and listen to the full version now.
Just Shazam it. Yeah, but yeah, he gave me the title now.
It's Badfinger, which was the band that Paul McCartney like mentored to be an Apple Records, Apple the Beatles label, not the tech company.
Nice.
So they have a lot of Beatlesy songs, and that was one of their.
I did look up. When I saw this, and I saw it a little on the early side before the wide release, I wanted a Spotify playlist immediately, if not a soundtrack release, and there wasn't one. But I hope somebody has pulled together, because it does have a lot of really great tracks on it. So
there are a couple on there now. They're not very comprehensive, but they're there. I actually hadn't seen the trailer until I think today when I was prepping making the outline. I was like, oh, I should watch the trailer for this. It really took me back that one, I think it's cut in the style of trailers from the 70s, right? I assume, which is funny. But then also it is just cut way more like just a pure comedy.
Yes.
Because
zany.
It's like, and which I feel like is misrepresenting the film to a certain extent. But it's like, and the tagline with the very 70s voiceover makes it sound like it's like almost like a superhero movie where like, and they're called The Holdovers, right? Like, it's really funny. But I think before we move into Oscars watch, I want to end on a high note, because, you know, this movie, I was cracking up this whole movie. Paul Giamatti, incredible. Like, he's just comedic timing, amazing. I wanted to hear if either of you had a favorite line, or just like a favorite, like Paul, like, I don't know, favorite comedic moment from the film.
I will take a physical comedy moment, kind of cut into the middle with no explanation. Is just a funny scene where Paul Giamatti picks up a football and throws it terribly, and it's brilliant. And it's like, I was like, I swear that's just like they were out filming and Paul Giamatti did this funny thing, and they're like, well, let's just throw in this little moment of B-roll to spice up this section, because it doesn't really play in any way. Nobody sees him, but it's like it's this kind of wonderful little character moment, and it made me really laugh that it was a good physical gag. So I liked that. The big splashy one from the trailer where the kid falls over the pommel horse also made me laugh in the moment, even though I'd seen it a bunch. And then I always like the delivery of my line from the opening, son of a bitch, that's another detention. Just all really made me laugh.
The whole chase scene.
Yep.
Because it's so clear that he won't be able to catch up with him. Like, he's like already winded before it starts.
Greg, I'm so glad that you chose the football scene as your moment, because that I was gonna let it go. That was the thing I was referring to with the woman who was annoying next to me, because earlier in the movie, for those of you who are hanging out in the spoiler section but didn't see it or don't remember all the details, when there's the larger group of holdovers, the really crappy, probably racist kid takes a glove from one of the young kids who had snitched on him and then throws it away. And then, the kid takes the other one off and throws that in the water in order to sort of be like, you're not going to let me like be half, I'll be fully uncomfortable rather than half uncomfortable. So when that scene's happening, when later, like 30, 40 minutes later in the movie, Paul Giamatti's walking outside in the snow and he looks and sees something on the ground. The woman next to me very loudly goes, "Oh, the glove." And then he picks up a football and she immediately transitioned to just like, "Oh," as if that also had meaning and as if this was also a similarly moving moment for her. And then he threw the football and she cackled. And I also cackled because it was very funny.
It's the football that belongs to the kid who takes everybody away in the helicopter, right?
I think so.
He's like the football star.
He's the one always
refuses to cut his hair, right?
Yeah.
So it is like it is. I mean, I'm not defending what she did, but I was like, it is a callback. It is a callback to the earlier scenes of the movie.
Yes. I will say, since Greg unintentionally took something from my viewing experience, I will intentionally take something from his. I loved when Paul Giamatti's at the bar in the bowling alley and is trying to, I'm gonna like just have a nice conversation with this guy dressed as Santa and the bartender, and like I'm a man of the people now, and I'm gonna chit chat, and he launches into this like mini lecture that the two guys couldn't care less about. And I appreciated, again, the subtlety of the movie. They weren't like, "Get out of here, you," like, "Yeah, brainiac," like, who cares? But like, I liked that, they had like just a befuddled look on their face. That was very funny to me. I will also say, in terms of lines, I heard a whole bunch from the trailer, but still worked for me, was the exchange early when he hands back the midterms, or I guess they're finals. They must be on a semester system. And the kid says, "I don't understand." And he says, "That's glaringly apparent." And he goes, "But sir, I can't fail this class." "So don't sell yourself short. I'm absolutely confident that you can." What exactly that line is, like, killed it. Paul Giamatti nailing it. Loved it.
That whole scene is just brilliant because he there's a phrase, I didn't write it down, but there's a phrase he uses where he's like, "And I know because I've had the displeasure of teaching you all semester, and I see he uses like glazed unknowing
eyes.
Expressions or something like that. It just, the turn of phrase is perfect. My favorite thing is just every time Paul Giamatti uses a different word for like slouch, where he's like reprobate, Philistine, Vulgarian, I think he says at one point, right? It's just so good. It's just like the laundry list of insults, like esoteric insults, is great. I'm gonna say my personal version of the Santa scene is when I was a freshman in college, a wide-eyed freshman, and it was like our first time with a bunch of my friends going downtown to like walk around, or we were going to a concert or something like that, and a car pulls up and asks us for directions, and my response, it was, and the phrasing was like, "Do you know where X is?" I don't remember where they were trying to go. my response was not precisely no. And they were just looked at me like, are you serious right now? Like, not precise. And they made fun of me. They were like, not precisely. And then they just drove away. And they were like, okay. And then they just drove away. And I was like, oh. And so like this film really captures, I know I keep harping on the same theme, but this film really captures well for me the sort of limbo that if you're a student who's not traditionally entitled and privileged going to a elite school, and that you like there's certain things that you have to code switch and adopt behaviors and language that you have to adopt to try to fit in, and that like how that doesn't translate to like the real world in any way. And I feel like they capture that with all the characters, right? And that's one of the things that Angus and Paul bond over, I think, is like that they don't know how to talk to people. They don't know how to have a normal conversation.
Paul does it with the Harvard classmate, right? He goes up instead of down, right? To suddenly try to pretend he's on fellowships and so on. So absolutely agree. The bowling alley was, of course, the Wakefield bowling alley. And during the Q&A, a woman got up very angrily to explain how upset she was that the Wakefield bowling alley is at least a 20-minute drive from downtown Boston. And he presented it as if they just walked to that bowling alley. He could not have cared less. But apparently Wakefield, the crowd was very into it. Apparently George Clooney also filmed at the Wakefield bowling alley. So this is now, next time you all come back east, we can go to the famous bowling alley.
All right.
PT, have you ever been to that one? That's kind of your neck of it. Yeah.
I mean, there used to be a candlepin bowling alley in Melrose. Like when I was growing up, just bowling alleys aplenty. So yeah, in my hometown, we had our own. Wakefield is our rival town, our high school's rival. We do refer to it as Crazy Town. There are an inordinate number of high profile, strange things that happen there. I won't go through the list, but there is a very nice retro bowling alley. And I love that woman didn't understand that it's because Wakefield is stuck in 1971. That's why they can film
the
there.
interior needed no set.
They didn't have to do anything.
Yeah, we didn't have to do set decorations. They can't even use the one in Davis Square because they made that look too nice now.
Yeah. But it is Candlepin. Shout out New England. There's my New England card.
There you go.
It had to be Candlepin, it was.
One of the Alamo Drafthouse pre-roll things was a little like 70s documentary about Candlepin bowling and the rise. They called it. Well, no, I think they were calling it duckpin, which I thought was slightly different. Like it's more of a bulge. It's not really candlepin, but was talking about small ball bowling.
Nice.
Jasmine, who lived in Boston for 7 or 8 years, was like, I've never heard of this. And it's like, it's the only kind of bowling we had. Like candlepin bowling was the way to go.
Opposite. I didn't know bowling balls came bigger.
Yep.
Yeah,
we called it big ball
movies.
bowling because
big
we were
ball
like,
bowling.
what is this? Like, we'll go big ball bowling now. Once we found one like that. Too funny.
Okay, my last shout out, because I meant to mention it earlier and I forgot. One of the few times I could remember an editing move making me laugh. But there's when Paul runs out of the building and is on the steps and he shouts Angus like he's looking for him.
It's Christmas morning, right? Like he's trying to find him.
Because he went through all this trouble to get a tree and to get presents, and then he comes back and Angus is gone. He runs out. He screams Angus's name, and the zooming out crack. Like I just laughed so hard. And I in our Google Doc I asked like because I was like, it's some kind of zoom? I'm like, it has a technical name. I feel like I heard someone else use the phrase smash zoom, but I wasn't totally sure. And
I think it's whip zoom. Okay. I thought I added that in
because it's very fast. Yeah.
I think it's called the whip zoom.
But to me, that was like on the one hand, so very 70s, but then also very funny. It made me laugh a lot. So now we move on to Oscars watch.
Okay, so we all pretend right now that we just heard it.
Yeah.
Good. Strong music. We'll do it live.
So all the critics that I follow seem to think this is very firmly in the Oscars conversation. And so it's a matter of like how how much. It's not like whether or not it will get nominated, but how many nominations it will get. Do you all agree with that?
I think I know Greg sort of planted a flag already. I think that what he was saying is correct about it winning, like picture or director. I feel like there's this sort of these big movies that are there, Oppenheimer, maybe not no longer Killers of the Flower Moon. I'm not certain anymore, but sort of, those sort of movies that we're hanging over as like, these are come and challenge us. And there's been this sort of like, is it going to be Poor Things? Is it going to be American Fiction? And The Holdovers was one of those, like, could this be one that kind of rises up and is the smaller movie? And I think that it has all these things that we really like about it and that we've been talking about for 2 hours now. I don't know if it has quote unquote enough to say to be like, yes, this is the one we're going to crown. I think the three acting performances are close to locks for nominations. And I think that, I don't know about supporting. I think supporting actor. I think supporting actress and actor are probably very likely, and I think if either of those winning, I would not be surprised about. And I think the screenplay is likely to get nominated. Beyond that is kind of a question mark of whether it gets momentum or not.
Yes, I think if it gets momentum, what it needs is a big, like, public love this. And I suspect the Christmas movie is coming out the week of Halloween in a lot of locations, so that it lands on streaming like 2 weeks before Christmas, and it could become what everybody's talking about in that kind of everybody's home and we're watching it mode. But I kind of think that's a stretch. I don't really see that happening. I am not going to pretend otherwise. I just think Da'vine Joy Randolph is my choice for best supporting actress now. And I know we had blunt fever after Oppenheimer, and I still am dizzy with the after effects. But it just feels like this is the kind of part that should be rewarded. This is kind of how Amanda Dobbins has converted me from Big Picture, is that, like, Emily Blunt winning for that part is so stupid compared to all the great work Emily Blunt has done elsewhere. So let's not reward the crying wife drinking while the baby is upset parts. Let's do something more real. And while there's melancholy to this part, I think it's just so well done and well acted that I'm hoping she wins. I think PT nailed it. I'm not seeing Dominic Sessa getting a nomination. I think Paul Giamatti will, without really having a chance at dethroning Cillian Murphy. But we have to acknowledge that Giamatti is a star and a good member of the firmament of Hollywood. So I see Da'vine having the best chance. But supporting actress is getting crowded too. So I don't know.
The Giamatti getting the nomination, I feel, is partly the nomination is locked in because they are almost 20 years overdue for the Sideways snub. And so he's back with Alexander Payne. He's doing a great job. Let's make sure he gets that nomination. It's interesting. I'm looking at my from our premature Oscar predictions, which is a month and a half old now. But I'm looking at my document, which still had Lily Gladstone in supporting. I don't know if I don't think that Da'vine Joy Randolph is the favorite right now. It's somewhat dependent on how The Color Purple turns out. But like, at least I'll say at least my favorite, like, of who I would want to win. And I'm not like, I think there's like paths for other people, but like this path makes a lot of sense, especially if there is, and it hasn't always been this way, but if there is a sort of, let's spread it around, let's give awards for different people or different movies. I mean, that could be very clear. This is the Holdovers Award, along with maybe original screenplay, with the story that Greg said of, this is a longtime producer and TV writer who finally got to write a movie and it's this successful. And I don't know, I'm looking at original screenplay and there's a lot of, movies that we like, Anatomy of a Fall, Past Lives. And then there's Maestro, May December, Saltburn, maybe. And Barbie is the potential big one. But if they're not going to give Barbie the screenplay. I feel like this is in second place behind Barbie, and I think that like people may be overestimating how much they want to actually award things to Barbie as opposed to just nominating Barbie. And I mean, above the line, at least.
So you think it's the nomination is the award kind of thing?
Kind of. And then there's going to be like, maybe Barbie will get a couple production designs and song, and they'll be like, there you go. Three Academy Awards for Barbie, but none of them are above the line.
Right. I feel like, well, first of all, I feel like I've been writing off The Color Purple for a while because no one's seen it. And I'm like, it's a musical. People aren't that into musicals anymore. West Side Story didn't really do that well. So, but I feel like that's really going to come back to bite me. So I agree that we have to kind of keep our eye on that movie because it is sort of like, I think, the dark horse in the race right now because no one has seen it. And it could go one way or the other. But right now for this movie, this feels like a cool kids screenplay nomination type movie. You know what I mean? That would definitely get nominated, and maybe that would be its only nomination. Though I do think Da'vine Joy Randolph, I feel pretty confident she'll get in. I also am like, I don't know if she's in the lead necessarily. I don't think Dominic Sessa gets in unless the strike ends and we could start being like, look at this new discovery. Like if we can build a narrative that's like tells the story of how he was discovered making this movie and how he's like from the school that they filmed it at and all that kind of stuff, then I think maybe there's a shot. But I think that's kind of where I'm at. And I feel like, yeah, if this movie gets into Best Picture, I feel like that's your reward. Like that's what you get. I feel like the gesture, getting nominated enough is going to be the way of giving it an accolade.
Yeah, I will say if Poor Things does end up getting bumped, if Poor Things gets bumped and the Oscars do not also bump or extend kind of post-COVID, extend the eligibility window, because at least I had, and Jen, I forget if you did as well. Like I had two Poor Things. I had both Ruffalo and Dafoe there.
Yeah.
If Poor Things isn't in the picture, I think Dominic Sessa is pretty likely.
That makes sense.
I don't think that I think Dominic Sessa is more likely to get nominated, even if he can't tell the story as much. The stories is out there, as opposed to a second Oppenheimer person getting nominated. Even though
I was gonna say there's two other alternatives for the double nomination, right? There's Matt Damon, right? And then I don't actually believe that's a thing that would happen, but some people do. But then there's also the De Niro, Jesse Plemons, right?
Yeah, I feel like, is there a lot of momentum for Jesse Plemons anymore? People are like,
I'm not saying there is.
Plemons.
I'm just saying. Sure. I'm just saying. If Poor Things creates a vacuum, who knows? Anything's possible. A lot more people than I thought are on the Alexander Payne and Best Director train, and I was like, he's not on my list right now. But he does have a good track record at the Oscars.
Yes, that's what I was going to say.
Okay.
Is that he has a track record, and that also speaks to screenplay. He's gotten 4 of his movies have had screenplay nominations going back to Election. He's gotten director 1, 2, 3 times, Sideways, Descendants, and Nebraska. But that said, he's only made one movie in the decade between Nebraska and now. It was Downsizing. People did not like that movie. I did not see it because everyone said it wasn't good. It didn't look very good. And he's been kind of, I don't want to say he's been in the wilderness, but it's easy to sort of think like Alexander Payne, lock it in. But it's been a decade. The Academy's changed. There were some accusations levied towards him in the last few years. So it's possible that there'll be people that are like, we're good, Alexander Payne. This is fine. So yeah, I kind of think that it's that sort of thing. Director. I also had some possibilities for below the line if it got production design, costume design, maybe even makeup. I was really looking around. I'm like, Paul Giamatti doesn't really have a glass eye, right? He just has bulging eyes, and the glass eye is makeup or is some sort of a thing, right? So if it's like People Love the Holdovers, it could get some of those below the line nominations as the 5th movie in. But, I think it needs to really get a lot of momentum for Payne to push through. And I don't know if that's going to happen with the race the way it is.
Next Best Picture was saying that they noticed that the lazy eye switched throughout the movie.
I saw
Did
that
either of
too.
you notice this? Okay.
Yeah.
So I couldn't tell if that was like the makeup moved or if there were shots that were flipped.
I think it was the shot. They flipped shots. Yeah, that was my guess.
That makes more sense.
I don't want to lose this thread. So Alexander Payne said he has had so long in the wilderness because downsizing was kind of bad. He also was about to shoot like a global travel everywhere for 5 months epic, and the funding fell apart just before COVID. But here's the funny one. He almost directed a movie. I believe he characterized it as I flirted with, and he named a movie that was a hit movie last year. Anybody want to guess which hit movie last year he at one point was in talks to direct?
Every movie I'm thinking of is it's so inherently tied to the director.
Right.
Not an Oscar movie, but featuring many Oscar nominees such as Ralph Fiennes, such as
The Menu?
The Menu.
Well
Unbelievable.
Wow.
I could not picture what The Menu directed by Alexander Payne would have been. So that just blew my mind. And,
that's funny.
Can't possibly imagine it, which I guess would have filmed before this, although this did film 2 years ago. Like I think it filmed in 2021. So it's been delayed a couple times. So yeah.
I haven't seen any interviews with Dominic Sessa or like seen pictures of him, but I feel like that's long enough. I feel like it might be jarring when if he finally gets to promote the movie to be like, whoa, you grew up since this movie was filmed.
Like, hello.
He's off at college by the director's account. And just to your point, boy, would Da'vine and Dominic be aided by a late night talk show run now, right? Like the movie would be helped by it. They would rise up. I think of when the second Captain America came out, I saw Anthony Mackie like on the Tonight Show. I was just like, who is this guy? He's awesome. Like his energy is so big and so fun. And I feel like that's the kind of interview the two of these two actors would be giving and just making people hyped to go see this movie and see what they're up to. But they are following their strike rules, which they should.
I just want to remind everybody about Coda, because I feel like this movie
Please don't.
could have, hear me out. This movie could have, if it could have a similar path, or like if it were to have a path to like Best Picture, that it would be a similar path to Coda, because, and this is sort of what I alluded to at the very, very beginning of the show, which was like years ago now. But it's like a feel good holiday movie that has slightly broader appeal. I like this movie way better than Coda. I think Coda is a little bit schmaltzy and emotionally manipulative in a way that this movie is definitely not. And that's what I like about this movie. But that said, I feel like if enough, sort of as Greg is saying, if this gets the holiday season streaming bump and then word of mouth and people start getting on a campaign, if like the cast is able to get out there, if certain things kind of click into place, it could have kind of like, because Coda kind of like just got this late stage momentum and good press and word of mouth, and people were like, yeah, Coda, and then it won. So crazier things have happened is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I looked through, I do hear what you're saying. I was looking to see, like, is there a comparable movie like, recently? And I mean, Coda does make sense, but the thing is, like, Coda has that, like, and what about deaf people? Like, what about this community that hasn't been represented? And we have actors who are, breaking barriers, sort of, or at least, being put in prominence that otherwise aren't there. Which it's like, wow, man, what about white prep school kids in the 70s? Like, who's going to represent them? It doesn't have that like element. And so it's like, how far back do you have to go to sort of not have either? It's like, some sort of, I don't want to say like issue or identity thing, because that sounds so dismissive, but some sort of this is an interesting, like, new story or commentary on the world component, or like, who doesn't love putting on a show, like kind of like degree to it. And, Shape of Water, maybe, there's sort of the put on a show there. And then before that, it's like, are we all the way back to American Beauty? like as like what like the ennui of life and trying to deal with the people around us and learning things, etc. So it does feel like it's been a while. It would be an outlier. I do think that you go back to like, I mean, Ordinary People was much more dramatic, but like there are those movies in the 70s that were, like here are just interpersonal dramas about things that could win Best Picture. It doesn't. I don't know. I don't know if this movie is going to engender enough sort of heart warmth to get that kind of coda bump. Plus, I don't know if all the things that we've talked about are so subtle. I don't know if people will be like, and yes, I'm rewarding this story about generational trauma and education and war and class in society. When there are other movies that are doing that a lot more at a bigger volume.
You're probably right. So we'll.
But I mean, look, I think I'll say it here. I think Da'vine Joy Randolph wins. I'm going to say that.
Oh,
we'll see what happens. I think that wins, and I'm also saying right now, I think The Holdovers is the most likely to win original screenplay. Could change. I don't know. It could shift around. I think it wins those two, and that's that. Boom. I'm done.
Okay. There's the clip that I will play after the Oscars is over.
Yes, when I'm wrong. Congratulations, Emily Blunt and Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach for their locked-in wins after I said that.
All right, so I think that's a good place to wrap up. Shaming PT, always a good place to end.
You started by calling me a Nazi, for the record.
It's true. You've been a good sport.
Which I will say, Jen pre-clear. Jen did pre-clear that on a text. That would it be okay with that quote? And I, for better or for worse, was like, absolutely. It's a good quote.
I was like, are we the type of podcast that makes Nazi jokes? I guess so. Although the movie, it's we're quoting the movie, so we're not making that joke. We're making a joke about the movie making that joke. And it's a good bit. That line landed, I think.
And now whenever I'm on with PT, I can say still a Nazi as Indiana Jones. Yes. So it works out really well for me.
It's true.
I really do need a soundboard thing for every time you mention Indiana Jones. This is going to have to happen. All right. So PT, where can folks find us and follow us?
Yeah. Once again, to bookend things, you can follow us on Instagram and on Threads at The Long Take Review. In addition to following us or subscribing to us on any of your podcast providers. Make sure to make sure to leave a little comment, especially on Spotify and Apple Music. If you would, that would be lovely. And if you'd like to contact us outside of a social media environment, because those are frequently a nightmare, you could email us, thelongtakereview@gmail.com.
And Greg, where can folks find you and all the great work that you do?
I'll be at the Wakefield Bowl-orama in 1971, aka this weekend.
You're dressed for it.
Yeah, that's true. Thanks for this discussion. I do think, whenever we pick something apart, it raises it in my estimation. So it's always a good time. I am available online at assorted places. Most of them you can look at Ion Canon, EYEONCANON, or ioncanon.com for my Substack, which is not nearly as productive as Jen's Substack. But find me on Instagram, Threads, and on Letterboxd, I'm Obi-Wan Cass.
And you can find me at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI on Instagram and Threads, and Qui-Gon Jen on Letterboxd. And I do owe everybody a Loki review. It is coming. We'll have to see if this episode comes out or if my Loki review comes out first. I really don't know which one. We'll see.
I do like the parallel between both of you where it's like, here's my professional, respectable handle on all social media except for Letterboxd. And it's Star Wars Nerd 22. Please follow me. Please follow me there.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I don't think we're reprobates. I think we're good.
Yeah.
But Philistine.
Slouches.
Thank you for listening. You can follow The Long Take on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive reviews of films with Oscar buzz, as well as new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.
have waited a week to record, we would have had some filming locations. We would have had a list of insults. I would have gotten that adjunct professor quote like transcribed by someone.
That sounds good.
Out there. Yeah, I don't know if it's right though. That's the my
he went through. They were at 3 different private academy type places. Deerfield Academy was the one they mainly shot at. They also shot at the Fairhaven High School, which my mom lives in Fairhaven, and that's a public high school, but it's beautiful. The Delanos, as in Franklin Delano Roosevelt, built a lot of the Fairhaven public buildings, and they're incredibly gorgeous for where they are because the family had a ton of money. So that's what I remember. The MFA, the Orpheum. I don't know where the sanitarium was. It looked familiar, but I couldn't place it.
And then I feel like where they were shopping for books, I definitely recognize that as being.
Yep, that's the Brattle Bookshop downtown. I've been there. It still looks pretty much like that, but they 70s upped the across the street.
It had a sign. Like there was like off to the side. I was like, wait a minute, is this the Coop? No, it's the Brattle Bookshop. There it is. It's over there. In that outdoor area. I will just note, I don't know, Jen, if you're planning on keeping all this at the very end for the people who want to listen. I did look up and find while people were talking. The other 2 movies he said were Make Way for Tomorrow, which is a Leo McCarey movie from 1937 that was the inspiration for Tokyo Story. And it's basically like old people having to move in with their children because they can't afford their house anymore. And everyone's very sad, but it's like melancholy, some funny parts, but then everyone's sad. And then Westward the Women is the Western that he was like, it's just brutal. And everyone is in danger all the time. And half the people die. It's great. It's like, okay, you got it, Al.
Nice.
And his next movie is going to be a Western, he says, as long as funding comes together. David Hemmingson and he worked on an idea for a Western and are doing like an all-out Western, he said is the goal. So it's pretty cool.
I'm into it.
Yeah.
Is Paul Giamatti in it? I hope so.
Not confirmed.
He could be the doctor.
I did hear, and now we're just throwing random miscellaneous information that we didn't mention in the main show now, so I don't know what we're going to do with this, but the thing I didn't mention was that Richard Lawson, I think on Little Gold Men, was like, people might just not know that Alexander Payne didn't write this movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then it might win because they just will assume that he did the screenplay.
He hinted heavily that it was very, very collaborative. And so if he really thought it was up for the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay, I feel like he would have grabbed a co-credit on it. So I don't know. I didn't feel certain enough saying that out loud, but it's interesting that he was like, yeah, it was very collaborative. He specifically said he deserves the credit and he got the credit, but it was a very collaborative process. So.
Fair. And I mean, the last time there was a screenplay nomination was Nebraska, and that he didn't have his name on that. It was just Bob Nelson, the great Bob Nelson, who wrote Nebraska and got nominated for it. So, but yeah, I do remember sort of hearing maybe Payne like, kind of Matthew Weiner's his way into like, this is mine too. Like I also get credit for this, right? Maybe he's grown out of that.
That's the old Family Guy joke of Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, right? Ben Affleck's on the couch and it's like, hey, you'll put my name on that too, right? Like, you said you're done. Like, please put my name on it. Sorry, go ahead, Jen.
I was just gonna say this is the last time I keep the recording button on after I try to end the episode, because at the very least, this is proof that we just talk like this normally and not.
It's true. I mean, look, if you want to keep it going, I've got a tight 5 about how crazy Wakefield is. And I'll start with the fact that there is a full league of adult baseball players, and you have to live or have been born in the town of Wakefield to play in it. And they have a fully stocked 6-team league that continues to exist of people who play baseball all through the summer, who are either graduates of Wakefield High School, currently live in Wakefield. They're 18 to like 50 something.
Wow.
That's just a thing that apparently they do. That's a Wakefield thing.
Wow. I go there to McDonald's. That's all I do in Wakefield is when the kids want Happy Meals, I shoot out Main Street.
You don't go to Webhead Comics?
I don't know. I've heard of that. Matt Myra on Nerdist used to talk about that, and I
keep going past the McDonald's, and then you got to turn left on Water. Actually, no, sorry, right before the McDonald's, you turn left on Water Street, and there's Webhead Comics is like a mile on the right.
I don't know if it's there anymore. Are you sure?
I don't, but it was there as
I go that way to go to the Jordan's IMAX, right? Isn't that what you just described?
It's very small. It doesn't have a big sign. Okay. It's just a little yellow sign. It was there as of like 4 years ago.
All right.
But maybe the pandemic knocked it out. But I feel like I would have heard about that from my nerd friends in the
I want to know if your kids have the Grogu from the McDonald's toys right now.
We haven't gone yet. We overindulged on Pokemon cards, so we're slowing down our roll a little. Was Pokemon cards the last thing, or was that 2 ago? I don't know.
That was 2 ago because they did the Halloween buckets.
And there's 100 Disney things, so your chances of getting Grogu are very small, right?
So we had this like lunch on the lawn thing at her school, and a bunch of the parents brought McDonald's. Like we pooled together and brought the kids McDonald's, and so they're all opening the toys at the same time. And her best friend got the Grogu, and she was like devastated.
Oh,
like she didn't dislike the one. She got like I think she ended up with an Elsa, though that may have been a trade. I don't know. It's not like she didn't want what she got, but when we had it the other day before this event, she wanted the Grogu so badly. She was like, she just wouldn't stop talking about it. And then her friend opens it up and was like, "Oh, I love this. I want to keep this." And I was just like, "Oh no." So now I think we just have to buy McDonald's every day until we get this Grogu.
They're also always very cheap on eBay. Like you'll maybe have to pay $5. Like
that's a promo.
Unless it's like where they like there's one gold one in the set.
Then it'll be expensive.
Then those are really expensive. But otherwise it's like it's never worth it. So
okay. All right, we've talked about McDonald's toys, so I'm gonna hit.
Greg,